Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcia Smith, and I'm here representing Black Mental Health Canada. We are very excited about today's discussion. It will be a panel discussion today that will be addressing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marcia Smith, and I'm here racism in our schools. Now, do forgive me, I have a little bit of an echo that is occurring, and I have care of it. So what I'd like for you to do right off the bat, if you would go ahead and invite family and friends to join us for this very important discussion. And I believe that you will be encouraged by our panel today, who will bring some great insights onto this very important topic of anti-Black racism in schools. Before we get into our panel discussion, I would like to just share a little bit about Black Mental Health Canada with you. And I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen with you to say very quickly, our mission is indeed to facilitate access to affordable, keep losing my page. Give me 1 second. There we go. To facilitate access to affordable, culturally safe, and affirming mental health service to the Black community through education, which is what we're doing today, advocacy, and provision of resources. I do want to encourage you to visit our website at blackmentalhealth.ca for more information. So that's blackmentalhealth.ca. And this is the second educational discussion that we're having, and it is our plan to have these on a regular, consistent basis to bring greater awareness of Black mental health issues to you. So we do invite your comments and your questions. Please go ahead and put those in the chat field. At the end, towards the end of today's session, you will find, the panel will be taking some questions for you. So again, I would like to invite you to go ahead and invite someone to be a part of this very important discussion that we are having today. Before I go ahead and pass this on to our esteemed panel today, I would like to read a disclaimer for you. It's very important. The mental health information in this presentation is provided as information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient psychologist or patient psychiatrist and or patient counselor relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your mental health and or healthcare provider before making any healthcare decision or for guidance about a specific mental health or medical condition. Black Mental Health Canada expressly disclaims responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained on this site or within the presentation. So I wanted to bring that disclaimer to you. And before we get into our panel, my role here today is simply to introduce Black Mental Health Canada, and I'm going to step aside now and have our panel discussion today, which I believe you're going to find this very informative. And so our moderator today is Sandra Mills-Fisher. She is program coordinator with the Toronto District School Board. I'm getting so tongue-tied today. And so Sandra, would you come and take it away? And I believe that everyone will find this very interesting. Once again, invite someone to join the discussion. Sandra, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Marcia. And again, I'd like to welcome everyone to our time together today. And we're looking forward to a very rich discussion that will really inform us and empower us as well. And so I will invite each of the panelists to just give a brief introduction of themselves. And I will start with Carl, if you could just introduce yourself. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. I'm Carl James. I'm Jean Augustine Chair in Education Community in the Diaspora at York University, and also I teach also at York in Faculty of Education and Sociology, and do work with the Toronto District School Board and the Peel Region School Board.
Thank you. Fiona, could you please introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm muted. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fiona Lloyd-Henry, and I'm a vice principal in the Peel District School Board. I've served as an educator in a number of different roles. I have served formally and informally as an equity champion. Before I became a vice principal, I was a coordinator for equity and inclusive education. My primary work was in coordinating the work of We Rise Together, or Board's action plan to support Black students. I continue to do a lot of the work of equity in my role as a vice principal, and I'm happy to be here today to engage with everyone.
Thank you. Anastasia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anastasia Gordon, and I lead partnerships at an organization called EVA's Initiatives. I'm also the chair on a board of the Canadian Black Standard.
Thank you. And Paula.
Hello, I'm Paula Allen. I'm the global leader of research and total well-being at an organization called Morneau Shepell that provides mental health services for individuals and families. My background not only is in research around mental health, but also counseling and assessment, family work, infant work. And I was a co-chair of the Workplace Mental Health Champions Council through Civic Action, and also on the advisory board currently of Campus Ontario.
All right, thank you very much. So let us begin with a fundamental question. We know, well, the first question we want to ask is, what is the evidence that anti-Black racism is present in our school system? How do we know that that anti-Black racism is something that our students have to face? Sometimes people will say that, well, you know, here in Canada, it's not as bad as it is here, as it is in the US. We'll see. We'll see what the panelists have to say about that. And so I will start with for your thoughts on what evidence is there that anti-Black racism is present in our schools?
I would think that Fiona would have been a natural start for that, insofar that it's in the school. After all, she worked with the Peel Board, and she talked about some of those. Of course, I said this because I worked with Fiona in some of this. So I'm going to defer to Fiona, and then I can come back afterwards.
Not a problem. All right, Fiona, go right ahead, please. What evidence is there that anti-Black racism is present in our
Anti-Black racism is endemic in all institutions, in all public institutions, and public education is no different from that. Disproportionate outcomes for Black students point to the presence of anti-Black racist schools. The fact that we're still debating whether or not it is present is actually evidence of its presence in our schools. We still have disproportionality in everything for Black children. So we could start with a curriculum that erases Black presence, Black experiences, Black cultures, Black knowledges and ways of being. We could speak to the fact that we don't have very many Black educators in schools, even though Black communities have been, Black scholars, parents, students have been advocating for Black educators for as long as the 19th century. We could speak to the fact that Black children are suspended and expelled at rates that are much higher than their peers. We could speak to the fact that Black parents are often excluded from the functioning of schools. I can't think of anything, any way in which anti-Black racism is not prevalent in public schools.
I think also significant here is the fact that we are deliberate in saying anti-Black racism. That's to underscore the fact that there is racism in our society. After all, when we to Turtle Island and then Turtle Island becoming Canada, that is to say that the putting of Indigenous people on reserves, that means that race will play in be on different relationship with this society and the different power structures. So what we're talking about here is what is it that's specific about Black relationship to the state, to education, to social production of labor, etc., that's particular for Black people. And so when we say anti-Black racism, we're calling to question what are the particular things in which Black students and Black people generally in the Canadian society that account for their social situation. Again, not erasing the historical relationship that, of how Blacks came and were enslaved in the Canadian context, and how that today continues to inform and influence what we are today. So as Fiona said, the high rates of suspension of Black students, the low achievement being streamed into non-academic courses, not even getting into university in high numbers, failing out from university or dropping out of university. And if we look at how these things are for Black students versus other students, we'll see different trajectories. And that's what we're trying to call into question about the situation of Black students. And so when we talk of anti-Black racism, we're talking about what are the particular situation of Black students in the education system that we need to take into account if we're going to address their lives in the Canadian context.
Okay, thank you. So the next question then is anti-Black racism essentially and inherently systemic? And so I think we've touched on that. I don't know if any of the panelists want to add to that question.
I would. Yes, Fiona, you're going. Sorry.
Oh no, I can defer to you too, Carl. You know, when we speak of different things. So, for example, right now the Peel District School Board is under review from the Ministry of Education, and we've been given different directives, and these binding directives, we're supposed to follow and make sure that we're making changes. But in spite of the fact that the ministry has responded to the call of the community, and we had the review of the board, we've had a number of structural changes within the board. There are some things that the ministry, for example, who's in charge of or things like core curriculum, has not done. So it's the ministry who writes our curriculum and sends it to us. You know, when the Conservative government came into power and decided that the math curriculum was too play-based, we went to a new math curriculum, and that was rolled out to us in no time, in record time. But calls to include Black experiences and so on into different parts of the curriculum, for example, in the history curriculum, we have not had any, we have had no meaningful conversations about that, about the ministry actually doing something to include Black content, Black experiences, Black scholarship into that curriculum. And it continues to be absent from all other curriculum spaces. So the notion that it, because this is what often happens, that it becomes just a relationship between individual teachers and not in a system, for example, that systematically and removes, erases, or makes the interests or the concerns, the experiences and so on of Black folks peripheral to what we do in schools. When we talk about streaming, as something that happens in local schools, we can stream because we have the means to stream students. Right? Our education system is set up in that way, that some students go into this pathway and some students go into that pathway. And though we hear every day that these pathways are supposed to be, equal in value, we know that this is not true. So we have a system that not only produces disparities, but we also have a system that exploits the disparities. And Black students, when they leave K-12 education, and Carl mentioned this earlier, that even when they get into university, they're still at a disadvantage and still drop out in rates that are higher than rates of their peers. Carl?
So when we say systemic, we're also not, there's a tendency for us to just simply think of these individual issues, like how teachers looked at the student, or the ways in which the curriculum and the student might be taken up by a teacher, or how students calling each other's name. We look at those individual things, but when we say systemic, we're drawing attention to it's beyond the individual. It's beyond those individual acts of racism. It's how the system operates, how it operates in the curriculum, how it's operates in how the structure of the organization, how it operates in the society generally. How is it that we accept certain kinds of practices and behavior and understanding in our society in relation to Black people and not challenge those? So what we're talking about here is how it's part of a systemic. It happens at the individual level, the institutional level, and the structural level or societal level, and all these operating as a system. That's what we want to get at. So it's beyond just simply looking at individual acts, but looking at how policies, programs, and all those other things are so ingrained in our society that's so disadvantageous to Black people.
Okay. And so then with that, let's ask ourselves, then what are the mental health effects of anti-Black racism on our students? And I'm going to invite Anastasia to share just, she as a young person who grew up in our school system, if she could share some of what she experienced. Oh, you're mute. You're muted.
Growing up in a neighborhood and going to a public school where I was one of few Black girls and also identified as having a learning disability. My lived schooling experience in elementary school in Toronto tells a story of negligence and disregard. So my lived educational experience was centered really on three themes: education and social barriers, questions of identity, and sheer frustration. Youth experience physical and emotional vulnerability when the systems and institutions that they access fail to allow access and do not respond or even plan for their existence, similar to some of what our panelists have said previous. So a lack of access to relevant reading material, assisted resources, and supportive relationships from teachers, administrators, and other staff members had a real impact on my mental health as I tried to navigate the school system. So when dealing with harmful treatment by teachers and peers, it felt debilitating. So youth like myself are not always necessarily aware that the treatment or targeted actions are oppressive and that are toxic forms of discrimination and anti-Black racism, and therefore they're made to feel as if they're not valued, that we do not belong, and that we're the problem. So I really do feel like these experiences contributed to me feeling alienated and really dehumanized. Personally, I had a lot of labels projected on me, and somewhere in there was who I really was. And I think if you're not given a chance to, in your formative years, to really express yourself and feel comfortable in your identity, your feelings, life can become more about masking and about who you are and how you feel, and really avoiding to talk about it because you want to avoid further trauma. As a child and well into my teens, I continually engaged with the world around me in order to navigate and resist the dominant ideology that I was a burden, that I was too difficult, that I was too outspoken. And what really happens here is if someone doesn't give you the freedom to be who you are, or denies your value, you implode naturally, which leads to isolation and a further decline in mental health.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing honestly with us and having us realize the strong impact that this has on individual students.
But I also, sorry, I'd want to add though, yes, there's that story. But again, we have to do more than just simply listening to a story and constantly reproducing these stories. We have to constantly think about how these stories are in part of a system. And if we never pay attention to how the program, how the practices, how the policies of the system reproduce many of the things that Anastasia, we just simply look at her and her story and never go beyond those things. And so that's why it continues with every student having the same thing without looking at the system. So we have to move beyond the individual stories.
Just to add to that, I think very often when we talk about does anti-Black racism impact mental health? Well, of course it does. There's no possible way that it couldn't. When you look at what racism is, it's a systemic racism is how you structure opportunity and experience, how you communicate and look at value of a human being, how you shape expectations. And all of that is done in racism, isolating specific groups in a way that doesn't make sense, that isn't logical. And many of you would have heard of like gaslighting and things of that sort, where you're shaping a reality that is not logical. It doesn't make sense. It's not beneficial to anyone. It is harmful. And that's kind of the experience that people have, as well as unrelenting stress, as well as building up a self-fulfilling prophecy that is negative and doesn't allow you to live up to your full potential. So all of that is a structure of harm. So I think what's interesting is that the conversation around racism and health and racism and mental health is well known, well documented. The American Pediatric Association actually has it as an agenda point of health that needs to be addressed. But we still have it. We still have a system that actually creates harm. And I would say that the most fundamental thing in any kind of structure, any kind of support, including schools, which is actually set up to help give individuals their full potential, help them realize the fullness of their potential. If you have it creating harm, then that needs to be at the top of the agenda as things that are addressed, because nothing else can happen if that basic requirement isn't met..
And I love that you said, from where our conversations are going, Carl mentioned earlier the ways in which we individualize things. Now, for each Black student, for example, Anastasia, with her experiences in schools, we have a system that is very race evasive. You know, folks call it color blindness. It's this notion that race is not involved, and her experience is an individual experience. And so you don't see the patterns of this type of treatment of Black children as a part of a system, because you don't, you know, people are not looking and saying, okay, Anastasia is having that experience, another Black student down the road is having a similar experience. Nobody's looking at it collectively as this is what is systematically happening to Black children, right? And you speak to, she spoke about the ways in which she was excluded, the failure of the school to affirm her, the failure of the school to make her feel as if she belonged or as if she was a part of the school community. And you see this routinely with Black children, where even when you have Black children who are excelling in schools, they are told, right, like there are particular Black children that they shouldn't engage with. That, you know, that type of Black child, you know, that person is less than, and so you ought not to, the parts of yourself that are Black, you shouldn't be engaging with that other person because you're more like us. And so with students, we see adjacency to whiteness, proximity to whiteness being rewarded, and you see Blackness in Black children being punished. And so the type of community, the type of fellowship, the type of communality and collegiality that would help to affirm Black children and would make them feel more comfortable, they're denied even that, because the hostile school environment first excludes them, and then, you know, helps to tell them or teaches them that they shouldn't even find solace in the friendship of other Black children, because, you know, those other Black children are less than or not really worthy. And so Black children are not affirmed, are not cared for, are not given the benefit of being, you know, children, right? They're not given the benefit of, even if they're doing something that's wrong, of it being seen as redeemable. They're seen as sort of a throwaway. And so it's easy to write them off. And all of those things contribute to a sort of flight or fight mode where Black children never feel like they could just rest. And that impacts both their physical and their mental health, right? And when they don't do well, even that becomes a part of another thing that they get labeled with, right? So
yep. It becomes a self-affirming system. And I think you know, I think what we're both and what we're all talking about is some pretty serious harm. Like, we're not talking about opportunity. We're not talking about, you know, doing things that are like kind of an optional intervention. We're talking about harming groups of individuals who have actually come to a system for support and education and validation and that sense of belonging and not having that. So, you know, I think that there's so many different levels that this has to be addressed, and not to make it too big, because then, you know, things don't move forward. But I do think that there are a number of points of responsibility. Number one, I think, you know, we really need to help those children who are going through this. You know, if you're internalizing, and it's very hard not to, internalizing all these experiences so they actually become who you think who you believe you are, that's harmful. Like that, this is where we are getting the overwhelming stress, where we are getting people who are confused, we are getting the behaviors that wouldn't have otherwise happened. If you're talking about, you know, a number of the things, Fiona, that you mentioned, those are actions of individuals. Those are actions of educators, other students. You know, somehow that has to be corrected on that individual level as well, where people have some accountability. And then, of course, there's the systems that Carl was talking about also. So this is multifaceted. But again, I just want to bring back, it's harm. So it has to be high on the agenda.
It also doesn't help that, even very often in conversations about mental health, that when you speak to the mental health of Black folks, you see other pathologies of Black people come to the fore. And so very often these conversations are positioned not on what causes mental illness for Black people, not on the environments that reproduce harm for Black people, but on the ways in which Black people are supposed to not think seriously or take seriously Black mental health. And so even that then becomes a part of the problem, because we're supposed to be a whole race of people who, unlike everybody else, we don't believe in it or don't value mental wellness. So even that's a problem.
So this actually leads to the next question then. So as Black parents and as a community, how do we, how can we help? What are the things that we can be doing to support our children and our students? And so maybe I'll ask maybe Paula to begin with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think that, again, I'll just go back to the framework of a number of different levels. So one that I'll start with is how we help individual students. So I think about what racism does. It kind of puts you in a situation where you're seeing things that don't make sense. It kind of, it shatters your sense of predictability in terms of the world where you hope to have some logic. And you don't want your children to have that experience and not understand and be able to put a label to it. So I think as painful as it is, and I'm a mother myself, we have to have the conversations with our children about racism. We have to kind of validate their experiences. Like even with you're with a child, you're walking down the street, something happens, you see something on TV, have that conversation and talk about it. How does it make them feel? What do they think is happening? Put it in context so they don't have this level of confusion about how the world is and how people should be treated. The other is your experiences shape who you think you should be. That is, I can't even more strongly, I really want this to come across very strongly in terms of how powerful it is. And you internalize behaviors, you internalize things. And what happens is another thing that is very, very, very powerful, which is self-fulfilling prophecy. What you believe of yourself, what you believe will happen, tends to happen. So it ends up being this very bad cycle. So I think the reality, like just to play the ball where it lay, I'm not going to even argue about whether it's fair or not. Black parents have more of a responsibility to help their children through this and to shape their experiences and to have the stronger messages of self-image and counter messages of self-image, become a part of their children, as opposed to allowing it to just happen through society, because it's too random and too negatively skewed in society. So, having your children be part of affirming communities, lighting up when your child enters the room so they feel good about just being who they are, listening to your children and helping them understand that their thoughts and feelings are important, giving them some skills. So when things are pretty bad. You know, you have an experience, you know, have a disappointment, you have something that happens that is racism or even not, you know, help them vocalize what that is. You know, having that opportunity to speak is important, and then teach them that they can make choices. They can pause and make choices about how they respond. Anything that you can do to strengthen and validate your children in this environment is going to be essential for them to get through it. And then, of course, I'll chime in as well, but I'll also leave it to the other panelists to perhaps talk about how, in addition to that, we need to address the environment that they're in and address the systems that they're in. But I just want to make sure that we don't wait for all of that to happen and not support our children in the moment.
And I'm wondering also, like, again, as you said, Paula, like to be able to sort of get ahead of things, because we know that there will always be situations that will be happening to our children. And so what are some of the things that we can do proactively as opposed to, again, reacting?
Exactly. It's the sense of validation, the love, the support, the belonging, the community. You know, you in every action that you take as a parent, as an auntie, as a member of the community, you're shaping a child's self-image. You have a lot of power. We have a lot of power, and we need to actually bolster up that power, because they're not always going to get that validation reinforced outside. It actually might be chipped away. So that is really the power of parenting, and it is a huge responsibility.
I think further to Paula's point, personally, I know that the way that I was celebrated at home and the community that I had around me at home looked very different than what I was experiencing at school, which caused that tension of, well, do they just love me because they have to? Or, you know, and really having strong advocacy within my family. And sometimes it doesn't come from the parents. Maybe it's an older cousin or, you know, another family member. I know within my family unit, I had a number of advocates that I knew that could be in my corner and stand up for me. And when I tell you, it made a world of difference in terms of me recognizing that I had people in my corner. And although these labels were being put on me in terms of, well, not sure if she's going to get through grade 3, not sure if she's going to get through grade 4, not sure if she's going to graduate elementary school to, you know, graduating with honors at the end of high school and moving on to a successful career. So really what it boils down to, just to reiterate the importance of advocacy and validation, is imperative in a child understanding that, yeah, there might be, you know, challenges, but also it's not you. There is a greater system that is at play, and it's so important because it can mean the world of a difference in terms of a child being able to move past and move on and recognizing that they are celebrated and loved, and that they have so much to explore.
Yeah, I agree. I couldn't agree more.
Now, we do have a question that's come in, and the question is, what are the systemic changes that need to be made? So maybe we can maybe we'll invite Fiona first to comment. What are the systemic changes that need to be made?
Where do we begin? You know, the structure of public education as we know it, you know, some folks would say that it's not broken, it's working how it's supposed to work. And what we're seeing, the reproductions we're seeing, were meant to happen. We cannot deny that, you know, racism benefits some people, and it benefits the dominant group, particularly dominant white society. And failing to recognize that, I think, would be detrimental for us. Systemically, we need to make sure that Black experiences, Black cultures, Black histories, Black contributions, anti-racism are embedded in our school curricula. We need to ensure that we have representation of Black and other minoritized peoples in our classrooms and in our schools. To make sure that they're there, you know, research after research has shown that Black staff, Black educators affirm Black children, you know, hold Black children to high expectations, and usually have or overwhelmingly have a positive experience with Black children. Black children, in fact, who've had at least one Black teacher is much more likely, for example, to go on to university or college. And so we need to have more Black educators in schools. We need to ensure that, let's say, for example, regional choice programs or programs that you know, are supposed to enrich students are available to all children. And then with Black children, and that Black children, for example, shouldn't have to jump through hoops to get into some of these programs, many of which are usually far outside of communities where Black children live or that have high density of Black children. So, you know, even where they're located, help to keep Black children out. A lot of these programs have all sorts of costs associated with them that make it difficult for Black children to enter into them. We have high suspension and expulsion rates for Black children. So those need to be looked at so that Black children are not unfairly removed from their classes. They're not unfairly removed under one pretext or the next. We need to ensure that you know, particular testings, especially those that are subjective, are not used to keep Black children out of enriched programs, out of particular courses, out of academic or university-bound courses. Yes,
I think we also have to put into this discussion right now about mental health is the context in which we are living right now with COVID-19 and the particular implications for Black students, and how COVID, you know, online learning, distance learning, whether they're in class or not class, all these things, how right now has exacerbated the situation of Black students and racialized students generally, and Indigenous students. So, and how are we going to prepare for post-COVID classrooms and the situation of Black students? So we're thinking of mental health here in this COVID times is an extremely significant piece of the discussion that we have to have for students, because I'm quite sure many of them are going to be much more behind. How are they engaging if they used to have these the kinds of experiences in the classroom when they were seeing? What's the situation now that just appears a name on the screen with somebody on the other end saying something that they're supposed to be learning? What about the situation where parents are working and don't have the time or energy to be able to do the kinds of support while they while the children have to need that support and not able to get access to the computers? And we can talk about the advocacy of parents, but how many, when we think of the disproportionate representation of Black families in poor families, in working class situation, and not having the wherewithal, what we call in the academe, the cultural capital to do the advocacy, to do the support, how is it that they're going to be able to really, how are we going to remedy those kinds of situations? And especially when we think now of COVID. It's not to suggest that this is a dire situation, but all these levels of understanding, all these levels of issues we're going to have to pay attention to if we're going to really address the situation of Black students. And I know Fiona was going to build on that.
You know what's hilarious is the sort of Anastasia spoke earlier about the dissonance with being at home and being loved and cared for, and going to school and not understanding, which me is it, and how is it that my family could love me and yet I'm treated here. We also have a paradox even in the middle of this COVID, because suspensions are way down. Black children are at home and the environment is not hostile. Right? We talk about Eurocentrism in our curriculum, and they're at home, and here they are with opportunities for them to learn how to cook something their parents cook. Here they are learning how to solve problems, how to share with their siblings, and all sorts of things that they're learning that are hopefully culturally responsive. Except, and Carl spoke of this, the fact that many of us, as Black folks, are considered essential workers. We weren't essential before, by the way, which is essential. And we don't get paid like we're essential. So we're the ones who have to leave home to go to for 2 or 3 jobs, or children also alone at home a lot. So there's, is this better for them in terms of their emotions and their well-being because they're at home and not in hostile school environments, but where they may be not learning so much about, dead white men. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy.
We have another question. And so, as much as change is needed in the system, it'll take time. So what advice would you give to a student advisor working in the field right now? And I suppose as a student advisor, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think a theme that I hear running through that Paula said and Anastasia said, and I think Carl said as well, is the idea of affirming Black children, of helping to make sure that Black children can see themselves as individuals, yes, but also as a part of a broader community. In the midst of conversations every day about anti-Black racism, Black children could get the impression that their lives are always, at threat, and that they're constantly having to reflect on the fact that here we're existing in this world that is so anti-Black. But it's also important and so for that reason, I think it's really important for us to help Black children to see the broader Black community.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Paula.
Yeah, without question, like the broader one's experiences, the greater one's experiences, the more one realizes how ridiculous racism really is, even though it's built into what our lives are. But I wouldn't underestimate really how important it is for people not to feel alone. And I'm not just talking about like COVID alone, you can't go out and, it is that sense that you're managing, mountains by yourself. It's the sense that you don't have the support of others around you. That's not how our minds are built. Like human beings are built to depend on each other and support each other. And we need that psychologically to feel that we have a sense of, we have a community that accepts us and that we belong to, that we have others who care about our well-being and will stand up for us and help guide us. So, in the role of a student advocate, I think it's a very powerful role just to help Black children not feel alone. Support the diversity of experiences, community groups, except cultural illumination. Have them experience you and the interaction with you as someone who truly cares about their well-being and has a positive view of who they are. Again, very, very powerful. I think, if you see how a child can respond to that positive view and that sense of connection as opposed to a child who doesn't have that, the paths are night and day. So I do think, I think those are some steps that you might take in the role that will really make differences in people's lives.
But I want to add to that is, while the parents are doing it, while community is doing it, we also need other institutions in society to do the same thing. Because I could be I could be the parent that provides all these good possibilities, positive things about my child, and I'm doing it at home and things are looking fine, etc. And if over and over again my child looks at the TV and these negative images keep coming, and that child goes to school and what TV says is also reinscribed in school, what does it say? So while we're doing these things, we're going to have to do the work, the advocacy work necessary for the media, especially TV and newspaper, all those, to do the same in order to understand that they have a responsibility to us as citizens to represent us in ways that it's, as we should be represented, like everyone else.
Well, I very, very strongly agree. And again, one of the frames that I've sort of developed over time is not even doing things to be helpful with respect to the systems, but just not doing harm. We in society, the various aspects of society have the capability to make huge changes when we recognize something as harmful and we make a decision to move forward. So if you think about how even through the schools, environmental responsibility, anti-littering, not having reusable things, like that became part of the culture. How we ended up, identifying something like smoking as harmful and how that ended up being woven through. I just think that there are so many things that we know need to be done, and we know what needs to be done, but the urgency to do them is the nut that has to be cracked.
Yeah, and to Carl's point, he mentioned that there's so many positions at play. So for a young person, in order for them to feel the confidence that's needed for them to boldly walk into spaces where formerly they may not fit in, or I think there's a role in that person being built up and feeling that validation that's necessary for them to go into those spaces, and for lack of a better word, sitting around the table, whether it's, for example, I tried for a number of years to get on to the board of United Way, and was successful in doing so because I felt like I needed to have a seat to be able to speak on behalf of my community based on my experiences of being, maybe not included in some decision making around programs. And so I think the role in which my family and my community might have played in confirming that I belonged allowed me to feel confident to walk into spaces where normally maybe I would not have felt that I belonged.
Folks could argue that a lot of these spaces where Black children, for example, even in schools, where Black children are taught that they don't belong, there are any number of things that help in that construction of exclusion for Black children. And it continues outside of school into broader society, where Blackness is excluded. And dominant white society, for example, that helps to construct what the spaces look like. Who gets to speak, who gets to have their ideas affirmed, who's listened to, who is listened to only if they're talking about racism or other forms of oppression, right? Versus other things. Like all of these things help to construct or sense of belonging. And society has all sorts of ways to get Black people, for example, to know their place, to put us into our place, whether it's not failing to listen to us, whether it's how we're physically placed in particular spaces. whether it's when we're called upon or not called upon. We see it in schools, and Black children are taught, they can see how they're punished, right? Like if you have several opinions, how you're then constructed as being problematic and excluded from a space. If you're quiet because you don't want to get into trouble, how you're seen to not have an opinion on anything. And so regardless of how you move, right? Like this type of socialization happens throughout school. And it's not just Black children who are socialized. Non-Black children are also being socialized into the place of Black children. And so by the time you become an adult, right, you could see how years of this type of socialization will continue to impact you and how you operate. Sorry, I think we're supposed to be going to a positive way.
Well, but still, we have to, you know, we have to make clear, you know, again, what the challenges are and not minimize them. There's another question from our viewers. Could culturally safe counseling support in the school system help? So we're trying to pivot to something positive. So culturally safe counseling support in the school system.
Absolutely. Anything that's, I think if it's culturally safe, that could help. But I would, again, I would say that as a Black woman, as a Black mother and a Black educator, I also think it's important not to socialize our children in having to deal with racism, but to say that, you know, well, we're going to have to dismantle it. It is, what are the things that are negative and deleterious to our children? And for those of us who, when we advocate for anti-oppression, to advocate not just on behalf of our individual children who are experiencing this, but we advocate as a collective, so that, you know, everybody does not have what Carl called earlier the social capital to advocate in the same way. So, you know, to help to support folks right across, so that we can get to a place where education can be transformative.
But is any space safe though?
Especially if the space is constructed by the ones who make it unsafe. It's supposed to be unsafe for us, Carl. It is a production of racism and the exploitation of what they see as things that render these problems. We can't forget that there are people who benefit from racist structures, right?
I am going to pose one final question before I guess the final question, and this is also from our viewers. How are we engaging lawmakers to influence the needed changes? Or or maybe the question is, how should we be engaging lawmakers?
A class action? Sorry. A lawsuit? Carl, what are your thoughts about that?
But there's no question that lawmakers need to be engaged. No question that the politicians and the people who make the law and the people who make the policy must be engaged. And probably we're not doing enough of a job in doing so, and therefore it's that question reminds us that yes, we can do all these good work as doing the counseling, and we can do it in class work in schools. But if the lawmakers, if the policies, if the law doesn't pay attention to how unjust and inequitably it is administered, if the lawmakers don't take that into account, if lawmakers are not really insisting of an equitable approach that pays attention to anti-Black racism, if that's not being done, therefore all the work we're doing on the ground, all the individual work that we're doing will not really take root in the way we'd want to. So therefore, we're going to have to engage the lawmakers. We're going to have to talk to our politicians. We're going to have to see that policies and programs are in place that respond to what we call anti-Black racism. And that's basic, I would think.
You know, recently, one of the things that the government did was they revoked Bill 274, the bill that said, you know, hiring folks in education had to hire people based on seniority. And so, you know, there's this list and you have to go through this list with the most senior people and hire from that list. Ironically enough, Bill 274 was created to stop nepotism in hiring educators. So we have Bill 274. Bill 274 knew that it was, you know, disproportionality in race that impacted, that led to, you know, 80% of our teachers being white. So we've revoked Bill 274, but even the draft bill that's now supposed to replace Bill 274 speaks to the importance of hiring, for example, new teachers, but also still does not speak to the importance of hiring, for example, Black teachers. So we keep, as a system, we talk about engaging lawmakers. One of the first things is to reject race evasiveness and color blindness. If you know that the disproportionalities are being caused along racial lines, if you know what's happening to Black children, why do we keep dancing around it, right? And refusing to name race in our policies. So we ought to insist that that lawmakers invoke race when they create laws and policies and programs and whatnot that impact children, that they speak specifically to anti-Black racism.
Thank you, Fiona. So I would like to now go to final thoughts from our panelists. And I'll ask Carl and Anastasia and Fiona if you have any final thoughts before Paula weighs in on some final thoughts.
I think the major point is we have to recognize the fact of what Fiona calls race evasiveness or color blindness, or the fact that we live in a society where we want to think that quote unquote race doesn't matter. We have a system where we would think that meritocracy holds, democracy works, and therefore all those things that we have come to think are really working as they should, operating in ways that disadvantage Black students, and therefore we just can't simply accept what's given. When we talk of racism, we must also think of the systemic nature of it and how it operates. For example, I think of how many times we look at the TV and see the experts who are talking about COVID and the impact of COVID, and how many of those experts look like us and seem to represent the issues that we'd want to represent in those discussions. So the last question that talks about us, the engagement of lawmakers, means that we have to constantly engage government, engage policymakers, and engage institutional leaders in ways that we would have benefit us. But it's not just simply engaging them, because people who look like us must also be sitting around making these decisions and informing and influence the work that's to be done. So as the case may be, we still have much to be done in terms of going forward. Thank you.
There's, I said for final thoughts, and there was one question that was just how to have our community engage more. So if anyone has, if your final thoughts, we're going to include something about community engagement, I'll invite you to speak next.
I think Black communities have engaged and always you know, if we look, for example, at Peel, it is the engagement of Black families, Black community members, Black students, Black staff, Black organizations that called in the ministry to review our board. It's their advocacy, it's our community's advocacy, which has led to a number of structural changes, not the least of which is a new director in our board. It is our advocacy that has led to a number of binding directives from the ministry that's leading our work. And I see the same thing happening in New York region, in Toronto, and so on, quite a few groups. And I think it's important for us to amplify the voices of those people who come together to advocate for Black children and to advocate for more transformative and just and fair and equitable schools. I think it's important to point to those folks, those of us who are openly critical of anti-Black racism and its operation in schools, and to make sure that our children witness that and can see that, and not think that Black folks have ever been silent in the face of their oppression. I think those are ways that we should also be engaging them to, as these are affirmative things. These are affirming things for them to be able to see and know the legacy of strength and resilience that exists within the Black community. I think those are really critically important things.
Thank you. Anastasia, I don't know if you have any final thoughts. And if you don't, that's okay.
I definitely echo my fellow panelists. And I know earlier there was a youth advocate that was asking about their particular role. And I think as someone who experienced has experienced anti-Black racism within the school system, I looked to those advocates for as an example, and I would just continue to encourage you to do that, continue that work that you are doing, because it's important for young people and students to be able to see those types of examples reflected in their community.
Thank you. And Paula.
Yeah, I have final thoughts in two areas. I think it is important for us to actually just name what is happening, because anti-Black racism is a risk to the well-being, to the future, to the mental health of Black students. I mean, racism is a known social determinant of health and mental health. I mean, if you just look it up, it's been well known. It's like, poverty, educational opportunities, a number of different social determinants of mental health. And it's important to make sure that we recognize that that is what it is. It has nothing to do with the individual. It has nothing to do with the person. It's the experience that they're born into, live in, grow, and age in. So we know that clearly. We have to keep reminding ourselves that we have to dismantle that structure. And I'll just put one additional thing forward, because I just believe that if you approach an issue from multiple perspectives, you have a better chance for success. And one of the things is racism doesn't make sense. It is harmful. But part of that not making sense is that it is expensive. It is expensive to create problems that wouldn't be there before. It is expensive to maintain a streaming system. It is expensive to go through disciplinary actions and hearings that are not necessary, that could have been well addressed earlier on. When things work well, they work efficiently, they are to the benefit of all, and they are less expensive. So, I mean, that isn't the only driver, of course, but that is another thing, another element that other issues have benefited from, and this issue could benefit from, as we dismantle this situation, as we, take up and have more representation as school trustees, hear our voice as parents, support our children, so we don't have this cycle of self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's one point that I'll just put on the table as well. The other I'll just say is that we are talking about mental health. And, even as we're sort of moving through this, people are struggling, and there's a range of support that you can give to their children that I spoke about, but sometimes we need more. I would say reach out for and talk to others around community organizations where your children can feel on a level playing field and be validated in terms of their culture. If your child is really struggling, if you move from an esteem issue to a depression issue, then you need to make sure that that child gets some professional help in a safe way. So you can find free resources, children's mental health resources in every single province. Many of them require a physician's referral. So, find what it feels good for you, go to your physician or talk to your physician if you feel comfortable. But I would also do some pre-advocacy for my child as well, and ask that agency, ask that counselor, ask that professional about how educated and comfortable they feel about making sure that your child feels safe from a racial point of view, from a cultural point of view. Have they gone through any kind of process or training around their own biases? Because again, not everybody has. The system itself, even the helping system is flawed, but asking those questions brings it to people's awareness so they know that it is important and you can make good decisions on behalf of your child.
Thank you. That's some very practical action that we can take as parents and as a community to help our children. So thank you very much. So with that, we are going to conclude. And I'd first of all like to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you for this, again, very rich discussion. Thank you for the insight that you've brought to the issue of anti-Black racism in our schools. Thank you for sharing boldly and honestly. And we trust that for all of our viewers that you've been able to walk away with some very practical strategies to be able to help the children in your lives, and as well as to have a better understanding of how anti-Black racism impacts our children. But again, what we can do to mitigate and address and empower. So thank you to all our panelists. And with that, I'm going to read our disclaimer once again. The mental health information in this presentation is provided as an information resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This information does not create any patient, psychologist, or patient psychiatrist and/or patient counselor relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional diagnosis and treatment. Please consult your mental health and/or healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions or for guidance about a specific mental health or medical condition. Black Mental Health Canada expressly disclaims responsibility and shall have no liability for any damages, loss, injury, or liability whatsoever suffered as a result of your reliance on the information contained in this site or presentation. So thank you once again, everyone, for your insight and for the time you've taken to come together today so that we could share and be able to, as I said before, empower our parents and our children in our community. And with that, we will conclude our session today. Thank you to all of our viewers who have tuned in live. And remember that this is being recorded, and so you will be able to access this video on Black Mental Health Canada's website. Again, we'd like to thank you again, our audience, for joining us today. And we hope that you found the time spent enriching and informative.